Hi, I'm Kristen. Welcome to week 3 of the Scrap Fabric Love Scrap Buster Sew Along. If you missed either of the other 2 videos, you can click the links in the description or just go back to the Scrap Fabric Love main channel page and you'll find all the videos there, and still plenty of time to catch up. So today I'm going to talk about how I've constructed my quilt top, because I got it finished, and also have a chat about backing, so just scrappy backing ideas and things like that, and a few more ideas for what to do with less than 9 blocks. So last week I said if you had 9 blocks, you could make a baby quilt. So if you had less than 9 blocks, which is totally fine because we're all just, doing our own thing, busting our own scraps. And so you decide how many blocks is good for you. So I'm going to give you some ideas what to do with those. They're kind of smaller. Some of them are smaller projects. And I had been intending to make a couple of those this week to show you what you could do with it. But I have had a 6-year-old with a little bit of a sickness bug. So I've been a little bit hampered in what I can do with that. But however, if you hang on till the end, there are some more photos from Sew Along participants. And one of them did a small project with hers. So I was like, yay. So I can show you what she's done with it. So as I said, at the end, we're going to have some photos from other Sew Along participants. So that'll be fun. And then I'll just let you know what we're going to do in the last week of the Sew Along. So I hope you've still been enjoying it. And I'll go on and show you. This is the quilt top, but you obviously can't see it very well here. So I'll kind of go back in time with a clip explaining to you how I'm planning to put it, how does this work? How I planned to put it together and then what happened. So, okay. So I talked last time about how I was going to create some negative space in my quilt top by using a whole bunch of 4.5-inch squares. I kept calling them sashing. Someone in the comments suggested I call it mock sashing. We'll go with that. And we'll go with mock borders as well, because there's going to be 4.5-inch squares all around the border. And the idea of that was that I can still use little scraps. I don't have to find great big long pieces of yardage to make a big border or a big sashing strip or anything like that. So that's the idea. Now, I don't necessarily want to piece this all in rows. Now, I did say in the last one, if you're doing quilt as you go, I would do it in rows, and that's right, I probably would. But for joining this, the way I'm going to do it, just to make a quilt top that I'm going to quilt later, I'm going to try and do it more in quadrants. But before it's not going to be an exact quadrant because it's 5 blocks across, so it's not an even split. But anyway, but before I get to like quadrant business, what I've done is pieced my 4.5-inch squares into groups of 3. I haven't pressed these yet. And what I'm going to do is add them to the bottom of every block, like that, and the top of the top row as well. So you do the top and bottom of the top row, and then the bottom of every other row. But I'm doing it in blocks. I'm not joining it into rows yet. And the reason for that is if I do one big long row of like 17, it would be 17 4.5 squares across a row, then I've got all of these in one pass in the sewing machine. I've got all of these points to match. And so if I get one point off, then it's possible that the rest of them will be off. There are ways, obviously, to fix them as you go, but I just feel like for me, it feels easier to just join it to each block. It's probably not faster. So it's an option. You can go and do long rows if you're like, I have no problem with that. I don't need this, Kristen. then do it your way. That's how I'm going to do it. And then I'll be sort of deciding which blocks are going to be the end of the rows and adding 3 on the end there as well. It needs to be 4, doesn't it? Yeah, I've just realized that. Okay, so then I need to add another one at the bottom because there's going to be a row that it has. I knew why. I've got extra squares, and I was like, oh no, I counted everything wrong, but I haven't. I was forgetting. So yeah. So for the side ones, they actually have to be 4 long, so that, because I'm going to be joining them to this block and the row down there as well. Right, that makes more sense. Good. Okay, glad we figured that out. Anyway, and then I'll be joining blocks to blocks until I get groups and sort of quadrants or 2/3 or whatever you want to call it. And then I'll basically join it in 4. So for me, that's my little fix. So if you've got the same worries or you just don't like sewing great big long rows, that's another way you can do it. But you absolutely can do it in rows. You can just ignore this whole thing. If it's just confused you, ignore it. Just sew in rows. So, but that's what I'm going to get on and do. And I'll show you some progress shots and then the finished quilt top. So I've got all my sets of 3 that I was talking about here. And I'm just pulling any old block off and checking which way I've ironed the seams, and then iron these ones the other way. For this quilt, I'm nesting my seams, but previously I have ironed my seams open. I usually prefer that, but I just forgot when I started, so I ended up nesting seams for this one, and you can do it whichever way you like. And I also just want to reiterate here that there's tons of different layout options. So you do not have to do all of these 4.5-inch squares between your rows or in your borders. This is just the layout I chose to make. So you can absolutely just add blocks to blocks and sew up a quilt top, and you don't need to do any of this. So just so you're aware. But all I'm doing is adding the 3 blocks to the bottom of each, 3 squares to the bottom of each block. And then once I decide which ones are the sides and which one are the corners, they're going to get treated slightly differently. So the corners are going to need 5 squares down each end, because there's already going to be, as I said, the top row is going to have 3 squares on the top and 3 on the bottom. And then the other rows are going to have 4 squares, so 4.5-inch squares, to finish off, sort of like row end caps. I'm sure that's the row endings, that kind of, if you think of it that way. So anyway, it just becomes quite repetitive. You just keep adding them and adding them. You could, as I said, do it in rows, but this is how I decided to do it. And the way I grabbed the blocks and the way I started putting things together, I ended up with, rather than quadrants or semi-quadrants, I ended up with 3 sections. So 2 big sections and 1 row at the bottom to join together. So I'll show you that just now. This is me with my semi-quadrants or triads. So that's 1 block, or 1 section, sorry. And then this way. And then that section. So I still have to sew those 2 together, obviously. And then this purple row down. At the bottom, because obviously at some point I was gonna have to sew a whole row. You know, you can't see that. Anyway, bad camera angle. I'm really struggling with somewhere to lay out a whole quilt anywhere now that I have the long arm. I just don't have the floor space anymore, and I never had the wall space, which is why I have that weird half wall design wall. So yeah, I'm just making do. So sorry that you can't see the whole thing, but I think you get the idea. I've basically done it in sections like I was talking about. It's not pressed, that's why it looks wonky, but it's fine. So I will put it together, then you'll see the final quilt top, and then we'll talk backings. So here's the finished quilt top. I'm pretty pleased with it. Not every point matches where I'm joining the squares, but that's okay. And somehow the 68 by 68 inches that it was meant to come out when I designed it in EQ8, it measured it something closer to about 66 by 66 before I pressed it now, so I guess it might be a bit bigger than that. So I guess my 1/4-inch seam is pretty bad, but anyway, it's a square, so I'm pleased. Okay, so backing, there's obviously loads of options for this. I actually have another video called 8 Ways to Back Your Quilt or something. I can't remember what the title of it is, but it has 8 ways to back your quilt in it, and I'll link to it above and in the description. One of the ones that I use loads, and it's just super easy, is secondhand duvet cover. So I cut it in 2, so you've got 2 backings, because they, you know, the duvet cover is a sandwich, right? And they usually have really nice prints, and it's cheaper than buying wide back fabric. Anyway, I didn't do that this time. I wanted to use up some other bits, so including some pillowcases that came with a secondhand duvet cover. So I'll show you that in a minute, but there's obviously easier options than what I did. So mine took a day or so. It took a minute, right? But you could pretty quickly just piece together some large pieces of fabric that you have left over from something, or that you don't know where you're going to use, or that coordinate with the front, however you like to do that. I don't like to use completely ugly fabric in the back because you are going to see it. So, but you can use whatever you happen to have, and you don't obviously have to have one great big piece of fabric. So if you're completely new to quilting, a width of fabric is 44 inches generally, quilting cotton. And unless you're making a baby quilt that's about that size, you're gonna need to piece a backing probably. They do sell wide back quilt backing, which I talk about in this other video, but it's expensive. So for a scrap buster quilt like this, it's not probably the greatest option. So there's loads of scrappy ways of doing it. So if you don't have any idea what you want to do for the backing, I would suggest you go and look at that video. And right now I'm just going to show you what I opted to do for this quilt. Okay, so for my backing, what I'm going to do is use some pillowcases. So these are just black from, basically I bought a set secondhand. Oh, you can't see these, sorry. They're quite big. So those are 2 pillowcases, double-sided, both sides black. Nothing wrong with them. I could use them as pillowcases, but I have plenty. And what they did was come with basically a secondhand duvet cover that I bought online on eBay. And I've used one side of the duvet cover as a quilt back already. And so I'm going to try and use the pillowcases plus some scraps in other colors that go with the quilt. So some orange, and I've also added, this is what I've started, let me show you. So I've started already adding basically bits of jelly roll strips and things that are black and white. So the ones that were like kind of the scraps and leftover bits I had that had too much white for me to include on the front of the quilt, I've added to just some larger bits of similar colors. So like similar colors to what's in the front. So the pink, the orange, the blue, the purple, right? And then I'm gonna, this is mostly the pinks I think here. And it's just kind of random. And then I've got, where's the blue gone? Here's some of the blue. Okay. And that's basically just 2 jelly roll strips. So I'm just like getting bits and pieces together to make sort of sections for the backing. I'm almost going to do it in strips. So I've started one, not pressed this yet. And this is not with the pillowcase. This is another bit of black fabric that I had. But basically this is the bit of the purple. So it's just, I just added some black to whatever, pieced it together into a little, oh, you can't see that, into a little block. Okay, you see that now. And then this is just black on the side, but it's not long enough for the whole strip or the whole width of the quilt. So I need to add some more. So, can you see that there? So it's not, so I've got a little bit here that I can cut off at the bottom. I can't see anything, sorry. There, okay. So the black there is a little bit longer than what I've pieced here. So I'll trim that and use that somewhere else. It's gonna make more sense, I'll show you. But basically, I'm just using up some bigger bits that, a lot of these are not what I would call scraps. So some people would. For me, some of these are quite a bit bigger. I think that long purple one's like a fat 1/8 or something. And I might use it somewhere else, but basically I'm just trying to extend what I have without using some of the bigger bits of fabric, or even some of the secondhand duvet covers that I have for a backing, of kind of saving those for other quilts that I'm going to gift and things like that. So I just wanted to make a really scrappy back for this one and use some stuff up. So it's going to be black and other colors, but in bigger, much bigger pieces than the blocks on the front. So it shouldn't take me as long. So, and it's very free form and there's no math or anything like that. I'm just kind of cutting my scraps until they're sort of a rectangle or whatever. or a square, and then piecing it together, as you can see there. It's not really a log cabin or anything like that. It's just random placement. And I'm going to make 4 sections and see if I can get that to stretch to as big as I need for the backing. So we'll see how that goes. So this is just me cutting the zippers off these pillowcases and basically trimming off the other seams to open it up. So it's just a big piece of black fabric with one seam in the middle that I can use. And then just pressing and trimming all of my pieces, just trying to get, like, I'm not, it looks like I'm measuring. I'm not measuring. All I'm doing is trying to find a straight edge. So it's like big scale crumb quilting if you've done that. So all I'm doing is trimming off any raggedy edges before I decide what I'm going to join it to. And then I just find another piece and do the same thing. And then you just sort of build up these sections. And the idea is, I guess, that there's going to be it's basically going to mirror the rows on the front, but they're not going to be exactly the same width. Height, sorry. Yeah, I'm making the pink and the purple strips bigger because because I've got the long arm. I have to make my quilt backs bigger than you might if you were just doing it on domestic. So I'm adding a lot of extra wiggle room for basting on the long arm. So the pink section, a lot of that's going to get lopped off at the top, and I'll just use it in something else scrappy later. And similarly with the purple at the bottom. So I'm going to make the blue and the orange sections just a little bit narrower, or not as high, however you want to say that. They're all going to be a bit wider than the width of the quilt, and the whole thing should make up a kind of, sort of stripy. It's going to look strange. It's going to look strange, but it's going to be the same colors as on the front. So if it's folded up or squished up on a sofa or something, it shouldn't look too weird. That's the basic idea. So I'll try and find some music for you to listen to if you want to watch the rest of this. If you don't, there are timestamps in the description, or chapters, whatever you want to call them, and you can jump around and find the next section in the video. So obviously the quilt top is over on the design wall, and my quilt hangers up there I've discovered will not hold just a single quilt top or backing, you know. It needs to be thicker for those ones. So unfortunately I couldn't hang it up like that. Hopefully you get the idea, rough idea. That's the top of it just there. So, and that's going to get lopped off anyways, really, because that's going to be the extra. So a bit of the bottom and a bit of the top and in the sides will be the excess that'll get trimmed once the quilt is quilted. But let's move on to some smaller projects in case you can't face doing a whole quilt. So for one block, you could make a hot plate. As I mentioned, I think in my intro video, just use some Insulbright, quilt it up, bind it, and you've got a hot plate. Or you can make a wall hanging. You could either bind it and add a hanging to the back, or you could just quilt it without a backing and just stick it in a frame, and that works well too. 2 blocks, you've got more options. You could make a tote bag, cushion cover. If you add a zipper to one end, you could make a project pouch for the rest of your orphan blocks, or you could make placemats for your table. There's a Sew Along member who is doing placemats, and I'll show you hers in a little bit. But if you're looking for tutorials for any of these other ideas, I'm going to link to as many as I can in the description. So have a look for that. If you're like, I want to make a tote bag, but I don't know how, then go look in the description and I'll have some links for you. If you've done 3 or 4 blocks, you could, of course, make a table runner. I've never actually made a table runner myself, so I won't say too much about it, but it's always an option for 3 or 4 blocks in a row. If you've made 5 or 6 blocks and you just can't face making any more, you could turn it into a row and add it to a kind of a scrappy quilt later on. If you've made 6 to 8, you could just add a bunch of negative space and make a quilt anyways, just make it a bit more modern. And really you could do that with any number of blocks, from 1 to however many you like. So that's always an idea as well. So now we're going to have a look at some Sew Along participant photos, and I hope you enjoy it. These are the placemats I was talking about. Andrea Garcia has been working on making a set of placemats, and I think they look really cool. The Joyful Quilter has also finished a small project. So she's been playing with sizing down the blocks. And the last one she did was, I think, 3.5 inches square, and it's a little mini quilt for a colleague. So here's some more photos of folk who've been sharing blocks. Again, like last year, if you see an @simple, that's their Instagram handle, and otherwise it was probably sent to me through Facebook or email. And again, just like last time, if I didn't include yours, it isn't because I didn't like it. It's because I just lost track. So if you want to include it in next week's video, do just get in touch and let me know. Thanks so much for spending time with me. I hope you're still enjoying the Sew Along. And if you've just been watching and you've not joined in yet, there's still plenty of time, and you can always come back to this in the future. There's no deadline, no time limit. Next week is going to be the last video of the series. I might do some follow-up afterwards, depending if folk are sending me photos of finished quilts and things. I might add that to like a bonus video or something, but we'll wait and see what comes in. But for me, next week is going to be the last proper video of the Sew Along. I'm going to hopefully, assuming there's no more massive sickness in the house, I'm going to get my quilt quilted on the Moxie. So I'll show you what I chose to do on the long arm. I'm going to have my friend Tom from the Colorblind Quilter come and talk to us about some easy walking foot quilting options. And I'll show you any other photos that I get through. So if you haven't sent me your photos yet of your progress, or if you get further in this coming week, please do keep sending those. So you can tag me at Scrap Fabric Love on Instagram or Facebook, and you can email me hello@scrapfabriclove.com, and I would love to share your photos. So thanks so much for spending time with me, and I hope to see you again next week. Bye.